Welcome to the Are We Idiots Show, where we question the status quo on society's important issues while mixing in plenty of laughs along the way. Now here are your hosts, Mark Weaver and Rich Kroll.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Are We Idiots Show. We are your hosts, as always, Richard B. Kroll, Mark R. Weaver in the house.
Wow, that's extreme enunciation. I mean, you are, every week you're so creative.
Broadcast Professional 101. So, Richie, we have a great show, and you already mentioned I got a tingle in my spine. I got hair stand up on my neck. We're talking about the Constitution.
Oh, boy, you do look good today.
We're talking about the Constitution. Was that a Beatles song?
It
or
was.
No? Oh, no. It's Revolution. But, Richie, we always start with the tip of the day. What say you for our listeners?
Before I get into the tip of the day, a quick comment. Your brother-in-law, Chris Graham, Grammy Mooney,
Yep.
does our introduction and our closing.
Yes, he does.
And, I found Graham to be a all-or-nothing kind of guy, hit-or-miss kind of guy, right? You love him.
In a lot of ways.
In a lot of ways, right? You love him or you hate him. He's hilarious or he's not, et cetera, et cetera. And two women have these comments about, because they asked me who that was.
Okay.
One said, I'd kind of like to know who that is. I think he's got a pretty sexy voice. It's kind of deep. It's kind of intriguing. He's like a young Ricardo Montalban.
Big sexy.
Yeah, big sexy. And then the other woman said to me, literally, I fast forward over the intro and go right to you two.
We can't tell Grammy that.
No, we won't
when
tell
he
him.
listens, don't listen to that part, Graham. It will hurt your feelings too much.
But so at least half the women out there love you.
That's better than my record. So you have a tip also on top of that? Because that was not really a tip.
That's not a tip. That's just a comment, observation. So a lot of folks through the years, as you know, have come to me as their workout nutrition supplement coach and consultant.
4 or 5 people
At least 5. And as we get older, there's a category that we never thought about, and that is testosterone replacement. So a couple people have asked me about testosterone depletion and replacement. So as you may or may not know, folks,
What if you never had any to begin with? Like
if you
me?
had 0, then you don't have to worry about it. You will be womanly forever anyway. So after the age of about, they say as early as 18 or 19, but for most males when they hit about 30, start to lose a percentage point of testosterone every year. And this affects us in many ways negatively. It reduces our muscle mass. It reduces our energy. It reduces our sex drive. It even reduces some cognitive ability in the frontal lobe. Now, so guys it can really mess people up, right? It can even cause, some other important problems in our lives. And a couple of guys I know have gotten prescriptions from their doctor for testosterone replacement, and it's usually a cream. I guess there's other ways to take it orally, whatever. And it pumps up your testosterone, and you get a lot of this youthfulness back in many ways.
Didn't Barry Bonds use the cream at one point?
Yes, he did, and he became the greatest home run hitter of all time. So, folks, it's possible. I mean,
we're not giving doctor advice here, but
no, I mean, it's possible that this could affect you negatively. I would be very cautious, though, because what happens is if you take this testosterone supplement, even though your body's producing less, your body's natural process will start to turn off.
Right.
And then the body will just assume it's getting its testosterone from a different way. And then I think long term, there could be other problems. So some doctors now, when you do a blood test and they check your triglycerides and your cholesterol, et cetera, and your vitamin D, they're also checking your T levels. And if they're low, they may suggest prescribing. But The problem is you have to stay on it every week, every
Right.
month for the rest of your life.
Right. And
So-
and on the female side, there's hormone replacement stuff, which there. I'm not getting down this road, but there's some trade-offs in that as well, which are not necessarily great. So I'm with you, Richie. I think the natural remedies. We've been on this for a couple of years now, and I think it's because my family's a lot of vegetarians and vegans. But the natural ways to stay healthy, including some of these other things. So
Yeah, you're much better off making a health shake out of eye of newt, boar testicles, and the horn of a Spanish bull.
and if you're lucky, you'll avoid getting scurvy, Bora Bora, and rickets. Right? Are they your
Yes.
three?
You will avoid those.
I've been listening over the last 45
Very
years.
good. I'm impressed.
All right, so on our show, I want to thank our patrons, Mark Zlotnikoff, Eric Weaver, George Muldoon, Chris Barbie, Dr. Dave Nadler, Alvaro Puga, Rick Linares, Darren Tapp, Scott Carney, Larry Helms. And on our show today, we have Idiots of the Week. Rich has some nominees. And then for the remainder of the show, we're going to talk about the Constitution. And before everyone shuts off their podcast app, because we're going to be talking about the Constitution, it's kind of important. And I ask you to stay with us because the idea for the show came up during the Amy Coney Barrett hearings, and we're not going to take a side on her, whether she's a proper justice or not. At least I'm not. But it became very clear that senators and Congress people, mostly senators in this case, but a lot of people just don't know about the Constitution. And I'm guessing our listeners don't know much about it. And it's kind of fundamental. And it's really the North Star is my term, the North Star of our country. And I really think we should spend a little time talking about it, the key attributes of it. And I think it'll be a good reminder of how we got to be the greatest country on earth. So that's my little setup to pitch people to stay through the end of the show.
And I just want to warn people because here's why I love Mark R. Weaver. So the average male from the age of, say, 15 to 75 usually gets fired up and very excited about money, sports,
Women, Cars.
pornography,
boats.
drugs, boats, alcohol, boxing, MMA. Our buddy Mark honestly gets fired up like I've never seen when he gets to talk to you people about the Constitution.
Yes, it's definitely going to be fun. Let's hope it's fun for our listeners. Richie, lay it on me with your Idiot of the Week nominees.
All right, so we all know our Irish friends are also very feisty, fired up, passionate people. Apparently, this Irish woman was a little too fired up.
And by the way, speaking of Irish, I went to the dermatologist this week, and my half Irish side got shot up with freezing. So not only Irish have a certain reputation, their skin doesn't hold up very well to the sun. So go out and check with your dermatologist.
Wear your
folks.
sunscreen,
Yes.
people. A wild video shows a plane passenger, Irish passenger, going berserk after being booted off her Scotland-bound flight. So apparently, and this they don't name the woman, but she had originally requested from the stewards that she could get an aisle all to herself. So they accommodated her.
Wow.
Then they asked her, ma'am, you have to wear a mask during the flight. At which time she went cuckoo. So the footage shot by another passenger on Sunday's EasyJet flight from Belfast, Northern Ireland to Edinburgh shows the woman losing her cool when a flight attendant approaches her to escort her from the plane for not wearing a mask.
Right.
She starts shouting, "Everybody dies, you know that. Every effing buddy dies, whether it's corona or not. Everybody dies." Then
We just
she-
hope to not die this week, ma'am, if you don't mind.
if you don't mind. Then the woman briskly walks down the aisle of the plane while purposefully coughing
Oh, my
on the
goodness.
passengers and shouting again, "Everybody dies. That's the only thing that's real." Everybody started shouting at her and telling her to get a life and shut the heck up. And the woman was arrested by airport police in Belfast.
Good.
The Edinburgh News reported.
Good. I don't understand. Like, I mean, I don't know the law in much granular detail like I should, but could that be assault?
Absolutely.
If you were coughing purposely on someone and you were diseased? I guess if you weren't diseased, it wouldn't be.
No,
but
it's still
is it?
spitting on someone is considered assault.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I saw the video. She's turning like 4 or 5 times and going, like over people's heads.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable, right? This one
might be the winner.
The other one's aggravating. This one almost has to be the winner. And I mention them almost every week.
Florida? Not a Florida again.
Larry Helms is the best in the world at being a farm system for idiots of the week, and they're all out of Florida. So I got to give credit.
Thank you,
where
Larry.
credit's due. Thank you again. This from Winter Haven, Florida. Florida authorities are sharing the details of an unusual 911 call from a man who said he wanted to report himself drunk driving. Polk County Sheriff's officials say the dispatcher kept him talking while directing officers to the scene. When the dispatcher asked Michael Lester, 41, where he was, he said, "I'm too drunk. I don't know where I'm at." And when she asked what he'd been doing all night, he said, "I don't know. Driving around trying to get pulled over. I'm driving on the wrong side of the road. Look, I'm parked in the middle of the road now," he said. And you can hear sirens in the background a short time later. Deputies said Lester admitted drinking beers and swallowing meth, and he said he barely slept for several days. The sheriff's office Facebook post says Lester's criminal history includes DUI, aggravated battery, drug possession, hit and run. Now, they also said, "Hey, folks, listen, DUI is not a laughing matter," the sheriff's office wrote. However, in this particular incident, nobody was hurt, so we can't help but LOTO. You know what LOTO is?
No.
Laughed our tasers off.
That's a new one to me.
I don't know where I am. I'm super drunk. I'm trying to get pulled over. I'm driving on the wrong side of the road. He called 911 to report himself.
Oh, my goodness. What is I know I say this all the time, but what is wrong with people?
There's a lot of problems out there.
That reminds me of a joke, Richie. Real quick one.
Sure.
So there's a cop. He's staking out a big bar in Texas, and it's hundreds of people in the bar, and about a half hour before closing time, this guy comes stumbling out. He can barely walk. He gets over to his car. He's like fishing. He drops his keys 4 times. He gets in the car. He turns it on, and he doesn't leave. And the cop's like, "I got this guy." He's like staking out. So he doesn't leave, and he just sits there with his car running, and he's like kind of slumped over the wheel. In the meantime, everyone else, kind of gets in the car and leaves, and the cop finally, this guy, the last one out of the lot, he kind of drives real slow, and he's kind of weaving a little bit, and he gets out on the highway, and the cop pulls him over. Gets out of the car and says, "I'd like you to walk the line, sir, DUI test." Guy does it perfectly. It's like he's not drunk at all. And the cop's like, "I don't understand it. I saw you come out of the bar. I saw that, you could barely walk." He goes, "You don't understand, officer. I'm the designated decoy tonight."
Oh.
So,
Wow.
Little quick joke.
Interesting.
Not bad. All right, so that guy obviously has the 911 call on yourself.
Mr. Lester.
Mr. Lester, you definitely get the $1. And we should just rename it the Idiot of Florida Award instead of the Idiot of Week.
We could, absolutely.
So, Richie, we transition to the Constitution. And again, we got the idea for this show because the recent Supreme Court hearings were about Amy Coney Barrett, and there's lots of back and forth about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and whether or not this was appropriate or not. But really, what I wanted to focus on, and you graciously agreed, was the fact that the Constitution is kind of important. And during those hearings, the whole subject came up of whether a justice was an originalist or a believer in the Constitution as a living document. Now, you and I have kind of bantered about this subject for years, and I think if I would paraphrase you're more of a believer that the Constitution should be more a living document, evolve, and I'm more of an originalist. We're not going to talk a lot about that today, but I do think it's important that we talk about the importance of the Constitution. And why is this relevant? Because I think you and I both agree that we have the best country on earth, and we've been the dominant country at least since the end of World War II. But it's mostly because of our system of government. It's not because we are superior people. You could make an argument that with evolution and the people that came here were risk takers, so we were more predestined to risk and stuff like that. But really, people are largely similar around the world, and it's really our system of government, which was a unique experiment that the founders did, is really why our country has thrived. And I think we've said that on 15 of our 93 shows at least. So do you agree, are we on the same page as like that is the primary reason, maybe not the only reason, why the U.S. became the greatest country on earth is our system of government?
Mark, can I call you Mark?
You can.
It's a fantastic question because there is we've both have traveled the world for work and personal fun reasons. And there absolutely is an air about U.S. citizens around the world, ranging from in awe, want to follow you around and party with you and get to know you, to almost detest and hatred because they have this assumption we're an arrogant, dominant, overbearing type of people. Right. So when you actually think about it, the U.S. from an economic standpoint, freedom standpoint, comforts, most people have ranked the United States for a long time the best place in the world, and a lot of people are always trying to come here.
Right.
But what? Yeah, you're right. What would make it the best? You would start with the people, but I find traveling the world that there's a lot of big people in Europe. There's a lot of smart people in Asia, India. There's a lot of idiots in plenty of countries too. There's a lot of really caring, nice people in South America and Africa. Yeah, you know what? We're just a melting pot and subsets of all the civilizations all over the world. Okay, so what is it? The landscape? Is it the abundance of resources?
Yes. It's a lot of things, but what's the primary?
But ultimately, I could say there's plenty of resources and beauty all around the world.
Right.
So if you actually start eliminating things,
right,
the only thing left is the basis of our government, which was founded on the Constitution.
Right? Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that we talked about this on the Libertarian Show and several other shows. This was not a norm. In fact, it didn't exist. This whole concept of individual liberty, individual sovereignty being more important than, in many cases, a monarch or whatever. And that was a totally foreign concept that we owned our own life and we weren't, subservient to some ruler, and whether it was a military leader or an appointed king or queen or whatever, what have you. This was a totally unique experiment. It didn't exist anywhere in the world. These founders, who were largely escaping tyrannical governments, kind of just thought this up and dreamed it up and debated and hemmed and hawed and came up with something in 1787. So let's review a little bit about the Constitution itself and the kind of the principles behind it, Rich. And I want to start with before the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. So the two of those documents together really are the guiding principles of our government today. And here, this is the first lines of the Declaration, which I'm sure are familiar to our listeners. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That doesn't mean you're guaranteed happiness. It's the pursuit of happiness. This is the key. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. So that's where I'd like to ask you, Richie, because you're good with the common man. It's quite clear, and the Constitution in the preamble makes this clear as well. It's quite clear that we, the citizens, are in charge. How do we get to a point that what I think we are now, and I follow this stuff pretty closely, that most Americans think that our rights come from government, that government grants us our rights, and that we look to the government when anything is wrong. We look to the government to lead us, that we want leaders as opposed to servants. How did that happen over time where we used to be a very independent, self-reliant folk, and now we're largely not? I mean, how did that happen?
I would think it's because the majority of not just Americans, but humans are followers, not leaders, right? And if you think about it, you pick a random crowd out on a sports team or where you work or your church or your school. Yeah, most people are not sticking their neck out. Most people are not raising their hand and leading the charge, right? That's why there's typically a captain of a team, right?
Is it because they're risk averse? What?
A lot of it. They're risk averse. They don't like to ruffle feathers. They don't like to have the microscope on them. They would just rather keep their head down and pursue their lives because I think they believe that will not introduce any controversy or conflict. And most people hate conflict. Most people hate
confrontation.
Right? So
me, not so much.
You, not so much. So that being the case, most people are obedient. You know, it's kind of the lemming mentality, right? Most people are followers. Do you ever pull up to a toll booth on a major highway, and there could be 5 green lights across 5 lanes, but there's 16 cars in one lane? Because as you pull up, you think to yourself, well, there must be something wrong with those other lanes. I'm going to get in with everybody else. Versus going, wait a minute, that's right? So people just naturally want to be taken care of and not creating havoc. And therefore, they look up to people. They look up to parents, coaches, police officers, the military, government, people with power and wealth. And our government represents the opposite. There are people that stuck their neck out. There are people that have been vocal, maybe to a fault, and they're okay with being under the microscope. So people, for some reason, are reverent and respectful and almost in awe of people like that. And ultimately, they create laws and policies and make statements. And I think it's kind of a reversed versus everybody that came over to the United States, our founding fathers and all the immigrants.
They were extreme risk takers.
Extreme risk takers as a group.
Right.
But now, 273 years later, everybody wants to hide. Most people want to just hide in their little corner of the world and go about their business.
I heard an interesting psychological theory, which doesn't really explain the change over time, but they said that a lot of people are predisposed towards communal living rather than independence, because the family structure is essentially a socialist structure. Within an immediate family unit, I mean, you're all in it together, right? I mean, you're all sharing resources. You're all kind of looking out for one another, and that the human being, because they're raised the first, I'll call it 18 years of their lives in a socialist type structure, they're less independent. Now, that was the case, 273 years ago too, but probably not the same as it is today. So this person was positing that we're gradually moving more towards a dependency culture because the family unit today is much more sharing of resources than in the old days. I don't know if I fully subscribe to that, but what do you think of that theory?
I mean, I guess it's got some legs, but I would argue, in the older days, families were bigger. There were plenty of 8, 10, 15 people, families living under one roof.
Right.
The older kids took care of the younger kids. There was even more of a communal situation, sharing the resources, and depending on back then. Today,
but that was kind of more peer oriented versus authoritarian. Kind of like the father mother take care of me. I don't know. Maybe I'm on a tangent on that. All right, so let's talk about the principles of the Constitution because I think it's important because it'll relate to our current day in a lot of ways. So the principles of the Constitution were natural rights. So that our rights pre-existed government. We have certain natural rights that were given to us by being a human being, and unalienable rights, and they existed prior to government. And obviously our Constitution has the Bill of Rights, which are essentially link up pretty well with natural rights and then some more detailed rights within as a citizen of this country. And only the federal government was created to protect those rights and also to collect taxes, provide for the common defense, kind of the common welfare, the interstate commerce, those types of things. But basically, we were 13 independent states, and all we needed was someone to kind of handle the big things, but not and protect our rights. That's why the federal government was originally instituted. And so this individual sovereignty was there, the natural rights were there, the enumerated powers were there, which is only limited powers, the separation of powers, the executive, the judicial, and the legislative branch, all were geared towards this goal of the individual liberty as the primary value and keeping government small. And obviously, over 240 years, whatever it is, we've strayed greatly from that. Why do you think that is? And maybe it's kind of a similar question as before, but we obviously don't think about these principles now and in the way that we look towards government. It's kind of been reversed. And do you think it's a similar question to I talked about earlier?
Well, I think it's a matter of size and expansion, right? So the 13 original states or colonies, maybe there was, 2 million people, less probably. It was a lot smaller, right? A much smaller, land mass as well. Maybe, a 20th the size of the U.S. So, and as we grew and grew and grew to 50 states across 3,000 miles and, into Hawaii and Alaska, now we're 335 million people or whatever. When things get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, it typically the government would have to grow with it, right?
And it has, but it's grown exponentially. That's the problem, and the things that used to be handled by individuals, local jurisdictions, states, because we're a federalism model where the states' rights are supersede federal rights. That's not the way it is now, and I think if just the sheer fact that the federal government collects the income tax and then doles it back out to the states is a big problem. It gives them the power of the purse, and then the states have to beg for the money back for something they want to do, and that's not how things were originally intended.
Well, my guess is, typically if you trace back the majority of problems in our world, it goes back to money and greed.
Right, and power.
Right. And everybody wants to be more important. Everybody likes to be in control. Everybody likes to have more money. And these government officials have access to all of that compared to the common man.
Okay, so and I said we're going to highlight some of the amendments to the Constitution. And the Constitution, just before we go to the amendments, is structured in articles. Article 1 is Congress, and it goes through all the rules of that. And obviously, Congress is supposed to be the most powerful branch because it's the closest to the people and the people elect them. The executive branch is Article 2 of the Constitution. And as most of you know that listen to this, the executive branch has grown in its power over the last several decades. Much of that is because Congress has not done their job. They've delegated a lot of power to the executive branch. And then the third branch is the judicial branch, and that's namely the Supreme Court, which is what prompted this show today. And then Article 4, 5, whatever. 5 is particularly interesting. That's where the amendment process is covered. And, we'll go through some of the key amendments now. Amendment 1 is free speech, freedom of religion, petition the government, freedom of assembly. I know that's popular nowadays with all these protests and riots, but that's constitutionally protected that you can assemble and protest. Riots are different, as we know. Riots and destruction of property or hurting individuals is a crime and should be prosecuted. Second Amendment, right to bear arms. Did a show on that many moons ago. I don't think we have to worry about quartering of soldiers too much anymore, but that
Quarterizing or quartering?
Quartering of soldiers. Basically, during the Revolutionary War, the British could actually take your house from you and use it for their soldiers. The Fourth Amendment is protection against illegal search and seizure. Fifth Amendment, very popular, protection against the right of self-incrimination and double jeopardy. We won't go through all these. I'll just highlight some big ones. The 10th Amendment is what I think came up a lot during COVID, and that is the power of the states, the federalism model. And, this is where we talked last week about how the COVID coordinated effort to fight COVID really was by governors, school boards, mayors, and they really had the power to close down businesses and have emergency powers, what have you. And the president really doesn't have that much power to do this. They're talking about Biden would like to have everyone, if he gets elected, like to have everyone wear a mask. He doesn't have the power to order people to wear a mask. That's something that for sure people don't really realize is that this decentralization of power is quite an advantage in most cases, but it really hurt us in addition to our obesity in fighting COVID. Any thoughts on any of the amendments I highlighted there before we go on to some of the other ones?
Oh, it's genius, right? I'm just sitting here thinking, well, if I was tasked to help figure this out 273 years ago, we'd be still hitting each other with sticks and throwing rocks to communicate. It's just amazing how thorough both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution really are at a genius level.
And I don't know if you know this, Richie, but this is something that I actually looked up. But the Articles of Confederation were the first document that was ruling the colonies. And that was in place, I think, from 1791 or 1787 to 17. Well, I don't know the dates, but basically that was the precursor to the Constitution. And James Madison, and we before the show we talked about how libertarians are big on the Constitution. James Madison is like the libertarian hero from the founding fathers because he really was a primary author of the Constitution, along with John Jay, John Tyler, and Alexander Hamilton. Madison didn't get a Broadway show like Hamilton did, but from a libertarian perspective, Madison was really the most compelling, I guess is the best way to say it. But really, the Articles of Confederation didn't address some of the problems that exist. They didn't have the ability to tax. They couldn't really force people to join for the common defense or an army. They didn't have the power to resolve disputes between states. So that's really why they needed to do the Constitution. And there was their struggle. There were the Federalists, which was Alexander Hamilton and such. And then there was the Anti-Federalists, and that was like Patrick Henry, give me liberty, give me death. And the only reason that the Constitution was ratified was because the Federalists had to agree on these Bill of Rights so that the anti-federalists would sign on. So these Bill of Rights were the pushback against the trying to centralize the government, and I think that the anti-federalists, which is what I would associate with today, Patrick Henry, those type of folks, they were really the ones that made this happen because they insisted on the Bill of Rights that protected the individual liberties of folks. So am I losing people so far?
Well, I don't know if you're losing people, but I can tell you this. I find this fascinating, educational. You're a plethora of knowledge on this subject, so I actually like it, but an elderly woman just side texted me, and she said, "Could you thank your partner, Mark R. Weaver? I haven't slept in 2 weeks. I just passed out."
And she could pass out and text you at the same time. All right, a couple other highlights for some of the amendments, and then we'll move on. So the 12th Amendment, Richie, I actually didn't know this one. The 12th Amendment separated balloting procedures for the president and vice president. I don't know if you knew this. I actually knew this a long time ago and forgot it. But the VP used to be the second vote getter. So the VP was, they all ran for president, and the second best vote getter was the VP.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the other, that was the 12th Amendment. Of course, the 13th Amendment, the abolition of slavery, 1865. In the 17th Amendment, this was the direct election of U.S. senators. So in the original Constitution, senators were elected by the state legislature. So before the 17th Amendment, you didn't vote for senators. They were appointed by the state legislature, and I think this is a better model. 18th Amendment, prohibition. This is where Joe Kennedy got rich, running bootleg liquor. 19th Amendment, women have the right to vote. That's in 1920, which it seems kind of crazy,
It does.
Yeah, amazing to me. 20th Amendment, 1933. This is when the president and vice president's term began in January. It used to begin in March. I actually didn't know that as well. 21st Amendment repealed prohibition. So no, forget that. Forget that 18th Amendment. 22nd Amendment, president is limited to 2 terms. So prior to that, it was just a tradition. And then Roosevelt had 4 terms, and they said, no more of that. We don't want any kings. So they limited it to 2 terms. Now, Trump would probably like to turn that amendment over. And let's go 2 more. 23rd Amendment, D.C. was given electoral votes, and D.C. has electoral votes now. And then lastly, the 26th Amendment. I'll give you a little quiz, Rich. This was 18-year-olds have the right to vote. What was the old age that before 18-year-olds have the right to vote?
25.
It's actually 21, but that's a good guess. I'm not so sure 18-year-olds are fully equipped to vote intelligently, but I guess that's the law. And then lastly, Rich, when do you think the 27th Amendment, we only have 27 amendments, and we haven't had one since when? When do you think was the last amendment to the Constitution? It was number 27.
1973.
That's a pretty good guess. 1992. And it was for congressional pay raises will only take effect after the next election. It's kind of a blah amendment.
That's a blah one.
Right. So we went through that quickly, but I hope people realize that the Constitution is really the premier guiding light of our society. The president, vice president, all justices of the Supreme Court, the military, a lot of federal high-ranking cabinet members, government officers, they all swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. And it seems like that would be something that the population would be familiar with. If that is our guiding light, they don't swear an oath to anything else. They swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, all of our leaders. And yet, why is it that so many of our citizens don't have intimate knowledge of this? And I guess that's why I wanted to do the show, Rich, to just give a little taste of what the Constitution is, what are the principles behind it, and that we're in charge of this government, but we seem to be so off course and we seem to be so ill-informed. we don't. I guess this is not taught in schools. It's not ingrained in families. I'm just trying. I know I'm an oddball, but I'm just trying to struggle with this, and I need Dr. Kroll to help me out.
Well, because the average American would rather be waterboarded or watch paint dry.
But it's important.
It is, but it is boring, right? So I can't get, family members and friends to read a really exciting book or movie, watch a movie. If you're going to ask people to go read, 100 pages or 20 pages of some dry document, I think it's important, but people only want to be entertained, right? And
wow.
So they're not going to look into this. I haven't looked into it enough. I don't know why. I guess we trust that if you take an oath, you're going to uphold it. So whatever's in there, we're covered and protected. But I just think it's boring to most people, and people are so busy, they'd rather do something else than research the Constitution. Now, I have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
So based on what you just described, it would seem that the Constitution is more of a living document with additions and edits over the time. Not just everything you read was from 273 years ago. So that's the first comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, because they built in the amendment process because they realized that things would change. But I think the principles of what the living document people espouse is that it needs to be interpreted, and the law needs to be interpreted. And I think the originalists say, hey, these words mean what they mean, and that's what. But there's always the vehicle of the amendment process to evolve it as society evolves. But that's different from saying, okay, well, when it says the right to bear arms, that means you have the right to protect yourself. Let's be honest. The reason they wrote that in there was to avoid the government having a monopoly on weapons in case the citizen needed to overthrow the government. That's why. It wasn't about hunting back then, even though that was part of it.
No, I get it. My question to you has always been, I think there's some principles in life, like all men are created equal, all men and women are created equal, freedom, this, that. I just wonder if some things, to your point, were written in there for the moment in the late 1700s that may not be as applicable, in 2020. That's the only thing I throw out there.
Yeah.
The other question I have for you is that 12th Amendment is pretty interesting, where the second vote getter would become the vice president.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why'd they get away from that?
I guess it's because they didn't get along very well, and they wanted a cohesion. I actually didn't read behind the change, but I assume, imagine right now if Donald Trump had to be Joe Biden's vice president. I mean, it probably wouldn't go very well, And that's the other thing. And there's no mention of political parties in the Constitution. That's the other thing I think we should all realize. People tend to think these political parties are part of our government. They're not. And there used to be other dominant political parties. And Richie, I'm hopeful that someday the Libertarian Party will rise up. I'm actually hopeful that someday we don't have any political parties. But anyhow, that's not part of it. So what are your thoughts on where we go from here, Richie? So this started with the Supreme Court and the fact that there's a replacement going on. There's 9 Supreme Court justices. And I would contend that the most important attribute of a Supreme Court justice is that they are in tune with the principles of the Constitution, and they interpret the Constitution as it was written because it protects us from an overbearing government. And I think, just to kind of take it to the next step, as a anti-socialist and an anti-communist and an
anti-dendrite,
big government, anti-dentite, that's the biggest hope I have, is that whether it's the New Green Deal or worse, that if you read the Constitution and you believe in its separation of powers and its the diffusing of decentralization, that it really works against the people trying to have an all-powerful central government that dictates us and provides for us. So I'm actually hopeful that the Constitution and the Supreme Court, if the justices are interpreting it correctly, are our best protection against an overbearing government. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's a slippery slope, right? Because hasn't there historically been a left or right leaning of each Supreme Court justice where
Yeah,
the
it's a super
Democrats-
legislature is what
Yeah,
really what it is.
Democrats and the Republicans get into, well, I want this person, no, I want that person. Or, this person might be left liberal leaning to stand up for Roe versus Wade, but this ultra conservative Supreme Court justice might be against. So I think it's a slippery slope because it's hard to find that middle of the road Constitution upholding Supreme Court justice that doesn't take a side before they get office, where they're open to either side and then comparing it to the Constitution and making a decision based on that.
But it really shouldn't be either side. It should be whether it conforms to the Constitution, the individual liberty, that to me, the Bill of Rights. And I just think, and again, we're not going to be able to solve it on today's show, but I do think that the nature of the foundation of the Constitution and the principles behind it do support at least holding off a big, all-powerful central government that does a lot of things for us with education and healthcare and provide housing and all the things that taking over energy, all the things that the New Green Deal wants to do. And I'm on board with some of the goals of the New Green Deal. I just don't believe in any of the ways they want to accomplish it. I think the free market can accomplish a lot of the what are admirable goals to reduce our climate burn and ozone gases and hole in the ozone and all the other methane produced and the animal agriculture. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think is good, but I think technology and entrepreneurship and research and development and the free market are the best ways to accomplish it. So,
well, remember though, you're a staunch principalist. There's nothing wrong with that, and in fact, there's a lot of honor in that. But that often clouds should versus reality,
right?
And that's part of the problem.
So what are your final thoughts, Richie, on the Constitution packing the court? Do you think that the Democrats are going to want to try to pack the Supreme Court?
Of course.
Do you think they'll get away with it? Do you think they'll actually do it? And it'll require a constitutional amendment? No, it actually won't be. You don't need to amend the Constitution to pack the court. But what will happen is they should do a constitutional amendment to prohibit it, because what will happen is as soon as the Republicans get in again, they'll add more. It'll be a never-ending leapfrog of packing the court, and I think it'll dilute the power of the Supreme Court if it just becomes a pawn in a bigger game.
So I'll leave it this way. One, I think this is a great topic, and people should go out and read the Constitution and understand it better. But I'm going to tee it up differently. I'm going to let my final comment be your final comment, meaning this is a perfect segue for your adherence and deep belief in libertarianism. Our country has become ridiculously polarly opposed, where it used to be a unified country where we happen to have the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, but all for one, one for all, World War II, etc. Now it's not the case. So from a libertarian standpoint, how would, and I know it's a 3-hour answer, but in a couple of sentences, how would libertarianism or a third party better uphold the founding intentions versus this diametrically opposed duopoly?
Yeah, so I guess the long answer would be go back and listen to our "What is a Libertarian" episode. We did it. We did a best of over the summer. That's the best I can do, I guess, in this format to explain how libertarianism would be different, how the federal government would be minimized, and specific examples. But broadly, I think you know this from our text string. I believe that it's more important. The duopoly, the two major parties like it the way it is. And the problems, our biggest problems in society are largely because government has interjected itself into free markets and our lives. And that's healthcare, education, retirement, certainly the drug war. I mean, there's a lot of examples of how the government has really made things worse when they try to help. So my main thesis is that it's probably more important to disrupt the system of the duopoly of the two major parties, all the lobbyists, all the money that supports both sides. And it's more important that that gets disrupted than it is a libertarian to get into office. So any kind of third party that disrupts their power, I think, is most important. I happen to believe that a libertarian with minimal government, they would get rid of lots of things. They'd spend a lot less on defense. They'd get rid of the Department of Education. They'd have vouchers for schools, all the things. They'd balance a budget. There's lots of things that libertarians would do. But I actually think that's a secondary priority to disbanding and disrupting the power of the existing ecosystem of Democrats, Republicans, their entrenchment, and their lobbyists and the money that supports both sides. So that's the best I can do on short notice.
Great job. Great job. Dilly.
So, but libertarians do believe in the Constitution. We do believe that's what made us great. I believe that we should all be mindful of the principles behind it. Who we are as a nation really came from these principles. And I would remind the listeners that we are in control. We don't need a leader. We are in charge. We can take control of this. We can change things if we band together. But if we're apathetic, it'll never happen. So that's my dilly. Any final comments there, Richie?
No, I got a little misty, a little teared up. I felt like Ben Franklin was talking to me.
Which, by the way, trivia. Did you know that Thomas Jefferson did not sign the Constitution? He was overseas in, I think, England or France. I forget which one.
Oh, then that completely debunks the Constitution for me if he wasn't involved.
And John Adams didn't either. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. There's a good trivia question for you listeners. Neither of them signed the Constitution. But anyhow, we have to adjourn. It was a good show, Richie. We got other shows coming up, guys. We're talking about, obviously, the election and COVID, but we're talking about doing a show on 5G, show on AI. I want to do a show on bogus government statistics because you can't believe a word what they say. And we even talked about a potpourri show. That was Richie's idea. Just have a show where there's no agenda, which would really make me uncomfortable. But you would be great in that. Just come on and just like let her rip no matter what. So you would be great at that. But as always, please remember, if what you see or hear sounds idiotic, then we're just the guys to help you sort it out. See y'all next episode. Take care.
Thank you for listening. Please download, subscribe, share, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and also our website.
True love won't say goodbye. True